Good evening. I'm Austin Davis, the Director of Government Affairs with the Lake Champlain Chamber, and you're watching live at 525. We like to take over once in a while here as the Lake Champlain Chamber and host this segment and use it as an opportunity to bring in a community leader or someone working on something interesting in our region to talk about how it affects our business community, our economy, and our collective prosperity. The Lake Champlain Chamber is one of the largest chambers in the state, and we serve the greater Burlington area. And with me tonight, I've got Chief Sean Burke from the South Burlington Police. South Burlington Police Department, and we're just wanted to talk a little bit about some public safety issues and the some of the concerns that folks have had around the community. That are manifesting themselves in some legislative action potentially in Montpelier, and you'll be in Montpelier on Friday to testify, as I seem to recall.
Yes, I will.
So by way of an introduction, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Sean Burke. I've served in Vermont law enforcement for the last 30 years. I started my career with the Woodstock, Vermont Police Department. Served there for 2 years before I transitioned to the Burlington Police Department, where I served 21 years. And now, since 2018, I've had the great fortune to serve as the police chief in the city of South Burlington.
That's certainly a long career in law enforcement. You've seen multiple eras of law enforcement. I guess tell me a little bit if there's much difference between serving in Burlington and serving in South Burlington. It's a smaller force, and you've got a kind of different community.
Yeah, certainly. So South Burlington historically has been a suburban city. Of course, that landscape is changing, which is fantastic. We're actually developing an urban center on Market Street downtown, and we have a plethora of housing opportunities that have gone up and that are scheduled to go up in 2024. So it's really opportunistic for me, because having served in Burlington, Vermont's actual big city, if you will, to see how South Burlington is evolving that way. Mm-hmm. And you also have to evolve police operations in that way.
Yeah, a new downtown core kind of means a whole new type of patrol, a whole different type of way of doing business. And I personally live in Winooski, and we always call ourselves Vermont's Opportunity City. And when you look over at South Burlington and everything growing and changing and the new employers coming in there, it certainly feels like they're trying to take that title sometimes.
It's a really vibrant community, and we're fortunate to have a fantastic city council, great leader, and our city manager, and the vibrancy is right on par.
Yeah, city manager that you did take from Winooski. We try our best to forgive you. So tell me a little bit about some of what you're seeing in South Burlington, especially with these changes, some of the changes in, violations of the law, community policing, what it's happening.
Yeah, there's a few things that have actually come home to roost in South Burlington now that we do have a little more urban grit. And what we're seeing are obviously the symptoms of substance use disorder. We have a number of untreated, unhoused folks that are living in parking lots, living in their vehicles, and that's disheartening on many levels. Mm-hmm. It's also an area where we're seeing a great deal of retail theft occurring from our large retail sectors, both on Dorset Street and along the Shelburne Road corridor. We're also seeing the acute mental health crisis in this state, and the fact that the systems of care are simply overwhelmed. Yeah. And we are having to try to help those neighbors that are suffering and guide them back. Unfortunately, the answer always seems to be the hospital, and the hospital is not well equipped to deal with the volume of folks that are in crisis in the community. So those things come front of mind. Ways in which South Burlington is building capacity, or has built capacity historically. We are home to the methadone clinic, the Chittenden Clinic, located on San Remo Drive. That clinic serves 1,000 Vermonters through through methadone treatment, and it quietly sits there. And I like to point that out to folks that are a little fearful of what drug treatment looks like. And we work closely with their security staff on whatever issues may crop up in that area. And also some of the housing opportunities that have been developed. Most recently, Brayburn Apartments is now occupied. So we're seeing people transition into those homes now. But of course, not everyone is ready for treatment or housing, and there is at times an instability. And unfortunately, because of the overwhelmed systems of care, the police are often called, especially after hours, to come and deal with whatever the problem is.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting dynamic where there's been over the last few years a large discussion around how people don't want to be calling the police for everything, how there might be a need to push policing actions to other places, but at the same time it feels like more and more is just getting piled on the police as other systems are kind of failing and crumbling or insufficient to handle all the need that's out there.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we do have help in that regard. We're one of the subscribing communities to the community outreach team. So through the designated agency, Howard, we do have that capacity. Right now it's Monday through Friday, essentially business hours, less than clinicians that will either do a co-response or will respond on their own to kind of take apart some of these mental health crises. But oftentimes the level of danger the person is presenting is either very apparent or unknown, and that usually does trigger, rightfully so, a co-response.
So what do you say is contributing at most to this? I mean, we're coming out of a global pandemic. We've seen new substances find their way into our communities. There's housing crisis. I mean, what else comes into these contributing factors, or those are the main ones?
So those are the big drivers right now. So poverty, folks that are living in the community, whether with a formal diagnosis of mental health or that are just situationally in crisis, substance use disorder that's not being met with treatment, or the person is treatment resistant. Those are really our top drivers. And of course, there's a perception around folks that are houseless. And just because you're asleep in a car in a parking lot doesn't mean that you're suffering an overdose, doesn't mean that you're there to commit a crime, but the community doesn't quite know how to reconcile that. And I feel as though that that we desperately need to figure out if these folks were living in congregate housing before the pandemic, do we need to figure out how to do congregate housing better now in order to avoid the problem of having folks sleep in public spots?
Yeah, this was something that we had at the Lake Chamber was engaged with in the legislative session last year. There was a conversation about a homeless Bill of Rights, and this will actually resume this session, but there was this vague language around activities associated with homelessness. And, one thing we kept bringing up was, what is that? Because that is very broad, and it depends on who you ask what those activities are. And, a lot of the perception in the community, unfortunately, associates many negative and sometimes criminal acts towards just being homelessness. And many of the folks who are struggling with homelessness are just that. They're in such a struggle that they're not causing a lot of harm to the rest of the community. They're very much focused on themselves and getting by. And so you don't want that just kind of blanket, vague term applying to anyone's perception. And so, it's interesting that you speak about that, and it does point to just, housing being one of the foundational issues in our communities.
I can't agree more.
Yeah. So you're speaking of housing. I talk to employers all the time in our community, and I talk to them about staffing. And housing is one of the biggest components that's holding back staffing for them. I've got to assume you're facing the same thing. What is your staffing like?
Yeah, so across the country, the police profession is suffering. And locally here in South Burlington, we currently have 34 police officers employed. We're authorized to have 40 police officers. And what that really means in terms of service delivery is we have our officers allotted generally to patrol. And we do not have as many officers in special assignments like detectives, the drug task force, or in our school resource officer positions, simply because we don't have them. And the applicants for police officers are not plentiful right now. And what we saw through 2020 and 2022 is that officers that were eligible for retirement, they did so. And with that, you lose decades of experience. And it's great, to hire a bunch of new officers and send them off to Pittsford twice a year, but they have no experience when they go. And it's going to be, 17 weeks at the police academy is the standard there. Yeah. And then once they come back to us, it's another 15 weeks of field training before they can go on a single radio call by themselves.
And you can't compromise on that, because then you're putting people potentially in danger. Right?
That's right.
So talk to me a little bit about Pittsfield and the residential academy. This is something that I was at a legislative breakfast that the Burlington mayor put on and Winooski mayor put on a little while ago, and they called this out as an impediment to getting community members engaged in the police force. Is this something you feel in South Burlington too?
Yeah, I think the profession in general, the residential academy is a great fit for a lot of people. So when I think about the 22-year-old Sean Burke in 1994, I was served well by the residential academy. Mm-hmm. When we think about other more diverse candidates, whether they're a little bit older, their parents, they have different things going on in their lives, it makes sense that we figure out a path forward to an alternative model. But what we can't do is slow the pipeline now. And the thing about the academy is it's really tremendously under-resourced in terms of staff there, and they rely on our practitioners to serve as the instructors. I just got the report today. South Burlington police instructors spent 303 hours this year instructing across all the curriculum there. And that's work we have to do in order to produce police officers. So in order to change our posture or our model is going to take a lot of strategic thought. And I think as a hiring agency, with both options on the table, you're going to have to think about what your recruit officer is best served by.
So there's going to have to be a level of being judicious and saying, well, this person's got all this career and life experience, maybe, and can't go stay somewhere for a number of months. We're going to find another alternative path to get them in the police force.
Yeah, that would be the perfect solution.
Gotcha. What else is, obviously there's been a lot of community discussion and soul searching over policing that's made the profession a little bit, non-advantageous looking to new recruits. What else is serving as an impediment?
I think the next thing that's really close is the lack of accountability in the system right now. Officers tell me on a daily basis how demoralizing it is to go out and arrest the same recidivists over and over again for, what are minor misdemeanor crimes, but actually cut really, hard at the fabric of the community, both in terms of economic vitality and also public safety. Yeah. So I know we like to point to low violent crime rates across the country now and that there shouldn't be this sense of we're not safe. But if you've lived in a neighborhood for 20 years and your car's never been broken into or ransacked in the middle of the night, or your packages have never been stolen, and suddenly that's going on, that makes you feel unsafe in the space that is yours. So we need to take that serious. And in terms of what the officers are facing with recidivists, we really need some policy changes around what it means when you've been arrested for a crime, minor misdemeanor crime, and you've been given court conditions, imposed court conditions, and what does it mean when you violate those conditions? Because right now, there's no teeth in that dog. Yeah,
I wanted to chat with you a little bit about that. So let's explain conditions of release to me. This is something that's kind of on the docket in Montpelier. Folks are interested in this. It's kind of folks are starting to feel their way towards this as being the cause of a lot of our recidivism. So an individual, they get arrested, they need to get arraigned, they go before a judge, and at this point, a state's attorney or deputy state's attorney they're going to ask the judge for conditions of release. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's statutory framework around here. To your point about the legislative session coming up, once the judge has found probable cause, there is then this analysis done, a risk of flight analysis. Generally, cash bail is really held for those that have been charged with a crime of violence. Other folks that might get bail are ones that have not been responsive to prior engagements with the court. We call it a history of failure to appear. But what we've seen grow, especially with the court backlog, is defendants who are racking up countless misdemeanors. So we'll use retail theft as an example. They are committing retail theft on a weekly basis. They've been arraigned. They have conditions of release to say that in many cases, don't commit new crimes. Don't return back to the place that you had stolen from. And that's
interact with the victims of that crime.
Exactly. Whatever the court feels are reasonable, to keep the community safe and to ensure future appearances of this defendant. And time again, what we're seeing is blatant disregard by the defendants for those conditions of release. They're getting arraigned on new charges and then put back out on either amended conditions or very consistent conditions that they have chronically violated.
And so I feel like the classic Hollywood Law and Order kind of view of bail is, you put the bail in there to keep the person in jail so they can't commit more crimes or they can't do things. But in Vermont, the language is pretty specific. It's flight risk. And a lot of these folks aren't going to flee their community or try to flee justice. They're just going to make more trouble in their community. And that's kind of in a gray area, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, I think it's probably an area where, flight from prosecution should be failure to abide by conditions of release should be the part of the calculus on a flight risk. Yeah. Because you're avoiding prosecution essentially because you're not going to be prosecuted. And I don't think the answer is necessarily like throwing everyone in jail. It's not really long incarcerative sentences, but there has to be really expedient intervention by the court in order to deter the criminal behavior. So, the calculus on the defendant side of this is, am I going to get caught? And if I do, what's actually going to happen to me?
Well, yeah, and so that's something that folks are honing in a lot too, is just that the inevitability of consequences or how rapidly the consequences come. And with our court backlog, it is quite a long time. I was talking to someone I was in a conversation with someone who's a former state trooper, and they're saying that they're actually dealing with 2018 DUI cases still, that are going through the court system. So long delayed, and if you're committing some kind of crime, saying, well, they're not going to get to me anytime soon. Doesn't seem to be immediate consequences to actions. Nothing incentivizes the person to not go out and do those actions again, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And those that are justice involved, they totally know because of the backlog on the trial docket, those serious crimes of violence, felonies, DUIs, those are going to be heard at trial well before their cases. And the longer they can delay that time, the plea deal is just going to get better. The trial space is never going to be good for them.
Wholesale rate.
That's a great example.
If you could just kind of keep, and keeping underneath that threshold of what is a serious crime, right? Would that be correct?
Yeah, so the delineation really is a crime of violence.
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of logic as to why you would impose bail in those cases, but there has to be a better solution for these what are considered minor misdemeanor crimes, but we have recidivists that are just ravaging, particularly our retail community.
Yeah, I was going to say retail theft is kind of one of those types of crimes where if you stay at a certain level, you can then kind of continue on these. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more, because you have quite a retail community in South Burlington, and they're experiencing this.
Yeah, certainly. And just as an example, we responded to just under 500 reported incidents of retail theft in 2023. We're still distilling that data. Back when I first became a police officer, the felony threshold for retail theft was $100. Even then, that struck me as too low. So over the years, it was changed to $900 to match that of grand larceny versus misdemeanor larceny, and that just seems to be too high. Yeah. And when we think about the defendant's calculus about, am I going to be caught, and what's going to happen to me, potentially, if that threshold were lower, not to $100, but somewhere else, and the conduct was actually a felony, that would allow the police to make an arrest in that moment for that crime. And I believe that potentially could have a deterrent effect.
Whereas right now they're just citing the individual if they're talking to them at all.
Certainly in a lot of cases, and then depending on the relationship with your loss prevention community, a lot of these are late report. So loss prevention will have found the footage of 12 toolkits being stolen and provide it to us, and then inevitably we know who the actor is, and then we have to track them down and cite them in the court. Yeah.
And so, I think that gets at another thing, which is, I think that there's quite a fatigue a reporting fatigue. So you mentioned kind of numbers being that, and just immediately I go, oh, I feel like I've heard almost as many reports myself. That doesn't feel right. Do you feel like there's a reporting fatigue around some of these like lower level property misdemeanor crimes within our communities?
Yeah, certainly in the retail space. I mean, some corporations have a policy of not intervening with retail theft and not reporting. So those numbers aren't even in the calculus. A lot of our high drivers are businesses that have dedicated loss prevention. So they're actually out doing the work and making apprehensions. But I think retail theft in general is greatly underreported, as is like larceny from a motor vehicle. You go out, you realize you left your car unlocked, your car was rummaged through, maybe something was taken, maybe not. Not everyone's calling the police in those instances.
Yeah, or they're finding out too late. I had a friend who recently had their unfortunate situation. They left their car unlocked and had a checkbook stolen. Took them a few weeks to learn that was stolen. They thought it was in the glove box, and it was quite a lot of work after that when they had made that realization. So I mean, what can community members do? I mean, I know that there's a lot of, you're ramping up your efforts on the police front. Legislators are reevaluating some of these thresholds. They're talking about potentially adding up misdemeanor offenses related to retail theft to make them a felony. What can your normal folks on the street do?
Yeah, so in two different spheres. So at home in your neighborhood, if you own a car, please lock it and take your keys. Do not leave valuables in your car, whether you're in your driveway or at a shopping center. We could cut the number of thefts from motor vehicles dramatically if folks would do that. Likewise, with the trend that we've seen with stolen cars, a vast majority of our stolen car reports are unlocked with the keys left in them. Vermont, we used to be able to do those things, no longer. And so that could be of great help. And when we talk with our partners in the retail space, customer service, of course, it's hard to hire anyone right now with the workforce crisis, but great customer service is one of the best deterrents to retail theft. If you can have an employee on the floor that says, how about I hold that while you finish your shopping, or is there something I can help you find? We know that the suspects don't like to be in contact with the actual employees of the store, as well as thinking really strategically about how you set up your store and not having high value items near exit points, not having multiple exit points if that's a possibility, and also the use of security cameras and other things that we know, particularly with this recidivist population, they're looking for when they're kind of staking their claim as to where they're going to commit their criminal acts.
So what else, we're coming up on the end of our time here, but what else do you see as needed in terms of, just overall kind of system change to kind of turn the tide on what we're feeling? I think there's some debate still around whether our current issues of public safety are more perception or not. I'm in the camp of it's definitely not perception. I would say that even if it was just perception's important too. But what do you feel like needs to be done to turn the tide?
we need to double down on the mental health crisis. We have to figure out what's going on and get left of boom on this issue. And it's really tragic to see how some folks are suffering in our community. And as Vermonters, we just need to do better. And in a similar way, housing. People find more success, they have more stability in their life when they're housed.
Yeah, housing is I recommend anyone who's watching. We had a great conversation with Northwest Vermont Realtors Association a few weeks ago. Just talked about how we're just not keeping up with we're not growing our housing stock even close to the rate at which housing is coming offline, because we do have the second oldest housing stock in the country. And so people a lot of times forget, they take this we don't want to grow mindset, and to not grow housing stock is to actually be content with losing housing stock each year. And unfortunately, our population, well, I would be fortunate if they grew, but our population is continually growing too. So it's crowding folks out, and we at the Lake Chamber had a memo, a white paper we sent out with a number of organizations, and we identified housing as one of the big components of our current public safety crisis. And one thing we kept noting is that it's not just the individuals who are struggling with homelessness. It's those who are responding and assisting the individuals who are struggling with homelessness. If police officers and EMS workers and doctors and nurses and the folks at the designated agencies like the Howard Center can't find staff because they can't find housing, or those individuals are housing insecure, makes it really hard for them to folks who are very hard to house get into housing too. And that is really why the Lake Champlain Chamber is completely focused this legislative session almost entirely on housing and public safety, our dual crises in the state.
No, it's fantastic. There's no South Burlington cop, firefighter, or Howard community outreach worker that could go out on their salary and buy a home in our community. And even if they can rent a place, it's generally a couple of them spending some time as roommates for a number of years before they can save up a little bit of money for the American dream.
And as much as I know you'd like to go and advocate for a budget that gets them the salary, that's not reasonable either. I think there was a great piece that said not long ago that your average salary would have to increase about 55% in order to afford most housing that's on the market these days. We need to invest in that place, as well as investing in our mental health and other services that we have in the state. Well, we're coming up on the last couple of minutes. Any parting thoughts or?
No, I appreciate you having me in. I think, what we're seeing on the street is really a combination of a crisis involving substance use disorder, mental health, and poverty. And I want all South Burlington residents to know that their police department is responding to every incident in person, providing the best possible police service we can, despite our staffing challenges.
Well, if you're interested in more, we just had the South Burlington Police Department website up on the screen, and you can always learn more about the Lake Champlain Chamber and our efforts at lccvermont.org. And feel free to reach out to either of us with questions, comments, concerns about these crises that we're dealing with as a state. And hopefully, over the next 4-ish months, we'll see some substantive action in Montpelier, some investments in this health and service infrastructure, some investments in our housing that will hopefully start to turn the tide. It won't happen overnight. We didn't get here overnight, but we can start making the right choices, taking the right steps to turn it around. So thank you for coming on, Chief.
Appreciate it. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.